on 95.3 FM in Windhoek, Desert Radio. The Bold Voice.
Right, you are tuned into the Bold Voice here on Desert Radio 95.3 on this lovely Tuesday where we have been raving about celebrating International Women's Day. Mehafo, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling great.
I don't know how many times I've said International Women's Day today. I've said it a bunch of times.
Yeah, no, we have.
The whole playlist has just been tailored to celebrate women. And now we have Sharonice Busch, the National Youth Council's executive chairperson, here to talk to us. So just more women.
Yeah.
We're so excited about it. Good morning, Sharonice. How are you?
Good morning, Arlana, and good morning to the listeners. I'm pretty excited. Today is our special day. So I think we've reason to celebrate, to glow, and just to be happy.
To glow. I love that. I really do love that. Now, let's just start off with, just the fundamental question. For you as a woman, why is this day important?
This day is quite significant, Arlana, when you look at just the origin of this day, where a day is dedicated to the women on the planet, just to spotlight our achievements, our successes, insofar as also the oppression from which women have to fought through to have kind of like pierced and shattered glass ceilings. So this day to me is extremely important because it's a day where everyone gets to look at how are the women on the planet doing, and it's quite significant, regardless of our different classes, regards of our different titles, work that we do, but to be looked at as a woman and to be celebrated on the fact that we're a woman, for me it's pretty huge. And so particularly I think today it's a day we must really just be happy and thankful for, that we've got a platform also to speak about how far we have come as women and what needs to be done in as far as championing our issues and making sure we have gender parity.
And as a woman in independent Namibia, do you think women, including those from less privileged backgrounds, have an increased access to opportunities in our, modern evolving Namibia?
Thank you, Arlana. I think that's an extremely important question, and it directly links to the empowerment of young women in particularly, which is also primarily the work of the National Youth Council. And to reflect on that, Arlana, I think it's extremely important to share the following. The empowerment of women in Namibia remains an indispensable obligation that the National Youth Council in particular and the Namibian government in general understands, values and upholds. Our country has a robust policy and legal framework that underpins the work to empower women in our country. And examples of how we've created an environment to really empower young women and women in general. We can look at constitutional provisions that we have made, such as our affirmative action. We have legislation such as the Combating of Rape Act, Combating of Domestic Violence Act, where amendments have also been made to our marital and divorce laws. So when you look at all of this at just a policy level, we can see that there is a deliberate commitment to ensure that we do not only have lip service in as far as gender inclusion is concerned, but that we actually address creating an enabling environment where we equal the playing field for women. And when we look at that, I think we can really applaud the Namibian government for the work that it's doing insofar as promoting women's rights and women's issues. As a National Youth Council, we are also very proud of programs that we have where we ensure that in all our programming, in all our activities, we are inclusive of our work, especially with regards to ensuring that we have gender inclusion and that we're gender sensitive. But also just an interesting fact to share with you is that also predominantly the staff of the council are female-led. So also in as far as that is concerned, I think it's just an interesting side note perhaps to share with the listeners to really demonstrate that women are being included at important tables where decisions are made.
And then would you say, the situation in Namibia, do we really have gender parity both in politics and corporate? From your assessment, just what you can assess.
I think, Alana, before I get onto that, I think what is important perhaps to share as well is that I want to state that in as much as we've got legal and policy frameworks available as instruments to kind of like create a safe space for women, it is not enough, Arlana. And I think that is why I want to take it off, because when also we look at, you know, the ongoing issues that women still face, very, very well-known issue that we read about, that we hear about, that we experience because it's our sisters, it's our cousins, it's our daughters, is the ongoing gender-based violence that is a bloodbath for young women in the country. So when you look at the ongoing gender-based violence that we still go through as a country, it definitely goes to show that beyond legislation, beyond policy, work must be done. And when we understand it very well as well, we then will also then concede as leaders, as community leaders, as political leaders, as leaders in the economic sector, that there's conversation beyond the policy and legal frameworks that we have that needs to continue. Conversations related to our cultural norms, our values, our beliefs. Because in that context then, we also need to acknowledge, Arlana, that there's a collective and individual and collective responsibility we have in as far as taking the conversation of gender parity serious and forward. And that is perhaps what I wanted to add to what I've said previously. To answer this question that you've given me, Arlana, I think politically, Namibia, and it's very good to compare ourselves to our communities, because we're not an island on our own, right? Namibia is part of the SADC region. We're part of an African continent. We're part of a global village. How is Namibia doing by promoting women and ensuring that women are included in decision-making processes? Let's look at the political argument. In that context, Arlana, I think we must celebrate the fact that there are small milestones that is worth celebrating. We have a government where there's deliberate political attempts to ensure that we are inclusive. We have a prime minister that is female, a deputy prime minister that is female. We've got important ministries led by female leaders. We've got a justice minister who is a female, right? And we've got the recent influx of young female parliamentarians to parliament, both from the ruling party and opposition. I think in that must, as a youth leader, we must be extremely proud of that we are now witnessing a parliament where you've got the Honorable Emma Tuphilises, the Honorable Patient Masuas, and Honorable Ina Hengaris that are now able to articulate on behalf of the young people in parliament. And on top of it, they are young women that we must support, that we must celebrate, but that we must also hold accountable to ensure that they remain true to young people's aspirations and issues that concern young women in parliament. So when we look at that kind of milestones, Arlana, I think it's a notable achievement on the side of government to ensure that there's representation of young women, of women in general, in the political sphere. I am from the ruling party, and in the ruling party, at decision-making levels, such as Congress, we refer to it as Congress, where the decisions of the party are made for the next 5 years. We have also made a decision to what we refer to as a zebra style of voting, to be very deliberate about including women in decision-making spaces. So when we vote as members of the SWAPO party, we know that it's a vote based on 50-50. So if there is a spot to send, perhaps, for instance, delegates to a regional conference or to a congress, it's always 50-50 based on gender representation. And I think also as a ruling party, we really value that principle that was decided for the organization by those that came before us, because it makes the work easier, especially in a political sphere, Arlana and my colleague here, when we know how hard it is for women who are participating in the space of politics to emerge and to be taken seriously as leaders that can contribute. Often we are told that, especially operating in politics, that when you speak in a particular tone, oh, you're emotional or you're sensitive. And those are some of the stereotypes that we face up until today. So I think politically we have done extremely well in carrying women along. In private sector, I do want to believe that I do not have private sector experience because I've always worked for government. But when you look at the general landscape, you can see that you have women emerging as CEOs. Look at our banks, right? Our banks are headed by female CEOs. At Nedbank, you've got Martha Murorwa. At Bank Windhoek, you've got Berenice, who's leading Bank Windhoek. But I think more needs to be done. And not only have women representing us as CEOs, we want to see women in boardrooms where the real decisions are made by having gender parity in boardrooms where the decisions are made in as far as private sector. We also want to see more women become CEOs. We do not want to have the 3 or 4 that we can headcount here. So definitely in private sector, I think it must be more intentional about the different institutions to ensure that they mainstream the work of gender inclusion and gender parity in private sector.
Now, we are marking this day at the height of abuse against women, as well as a continuing high number of cases of gender-based violence. How best do you think society in Namibia can be made better for women?
That is an extremely important conversation. Last year, the National Youth Council was also talk of the town when, through our act, we every year in April get to celebrate the young people of our country in the form of the National Youth Week. And last year, we were very deliberate about participating in the conversation of having a zero tolerance towards gender-based violence, where we put a spotlight on GBV in the country. And our approach in our programming and in our activities were extremely unique and unconventional, where we hosted a sluts night and it got everyone talking.
Oh yes, I remember that.
Where we had the men's conference. We used the Youth Week to amplify and put a spotlight on how far we have come and what are we doing wrong, because the stats are not going down. In fact, we read about it more frequently. So we used our Youth Week last year to also join the conversation of gender-based violence. And whether there was positive or negative criticism, we were very proud as an institution that we got the nation talking, from ordinary young people to decision makers about the issue of gender-based violence. And why I'm saying that we're very proud of what we've done last year is because culturally, there is a conversation that must take place on our norms, our beliefs. And the problem that is linked to culture and how we as a country, as a nation, as institutions, need to address gender-based violence, fundamentally, in my view, is addressing how we speak, how we refer, and how we view women, and how we treat women. And unfortunately, these are interventions that, regardless of whether you have policy or not, can only occur by having honest, frank, transparent conversations. Conversations not only at the top, but at the very grassroots levels. In our churches, through our traditional leaders, through our counselors, in our homes as well, Arlana. And for me, this is extremely important because it is one thing to have policies, to have beautiful documents on paper about how we view and must treat women, but it's a different thing from experiencing it as a young woman, right? And so for me, primarily, my focus remains on, are we deliberate about the kind of conversations we are having that seeks to address the gender-based violence that we endure as women, and primarily linked to it. I also want to speak about the element of accountability that we try to escape as young people, and particularly as young women. When one of us, and I'd like to use our social media and what happens there a lot, endures gendered insults, where are we as young women to hold accountable those, because that is a form of gender-based violence. Where are we as young women to hold those accountable, to say it's not okay, just because I'm speaking out and I'm using my voice to participate in a conversation. It does not warrant or negate you to label me, and we know what goes around and how we are gendered insult as young women. But very often, and I observe that there's an absence of holding those that perpetuate these kind of violences not accountable. And I think that's a conversation that we must also have as young people, to say, then do we have selective morality when with regards to how we want to approach gender-based violence in our country? Because if it's a particular individual, we're very hesitant to hold such a person accountable, and that already shows you that there's individual responsibility that we have amongst ourselves to really sit down and reflect. But then what is my contribution in ending the violence that we have in Namibia if I'm unable to hold someone accountable that I know and that I see is perpetuating a form of violence towards women online through the cyberbullying and this insults and name calling that young women endure. And we've read recently of cases where women have now been forced to use the law to defend themselves because of the ongoing cyberbullying. And I really applaud young women that we have read in our local papers that have used the law to protect themselves. And really that for me is some of the cultural issues that we need to address as young women, but as women in our country as well.
And I like the point that you make about, how we talk about it, because I think a lot of times people don't realize that even cyberbullying is in fact, as you said, a form of gender-based violence if the insults are gendered. It is essentially GBV, and I think with the awareness campaigns that is becoming more understood, or at least I would hope it's becoming a little bit more understood. Yeah. Well, then, we've talked a bit extensively about GBV, but there are a lot of other issues that face women, especially young women in this country. One of which that just came to my mind is this issue of period poverty, not having access to basic, menstrual hygiene products and things like that. How are we addressing, or how is the National Youth Council working towards addressing the other social issues that young women especially are facing?
Absolutely. The National Youth Council has a very unique structure, Arlana, in that, one, the National Youth Council is youth-led, but two, we've got a footprint of young people across the country. Contrary to a widespread phenomenon or belief that the National Youth Council perhaps just belongs to a certain group of young people, we've got structures countrywide. The National Youth Council has got regional youth forums, which are I want to say regional body that NYC funds, that reports back to the National Youth Council, through which we also want to ensure that our work, one, is inclusive and that it's not just Windhoek based or working in the capital. So we've got young people that are in structures at a constituency level up until a regional level. And what we do with our youth in the regional youth forums is that the National Youth Council has an act through which we draw our mandate and through which we need to implement our work. And we're also a state-owned enterprise. We receive our funding from the state. We've got a grant through our line Ministry of Sports, Youth and National Service. And in our planning, we then demarcate funds to the regional youth forums, where we, one, give them access to funding, two, give them the responsibility, not dictate. Of course, we've got a strategic plan that informs the kind of work that we want to do for the 5 years. But because there must always be an ownership in what you do, the Regional Youth Forum does its planning of what it wants to do for the young people in our country. Alana, I think it must also be, it must be accepted to say that the challenges that we face in our regions for young people are also different.
Absolutely.
And therefore, it is extremely important that they own the process of their development in the particular regions. So they do their planning and submit it to head office, which is where I'm based, and heading it as its executive chairperson. And in turn, they've got support to our financial resources, but on top of it, also our stakeholders. And we've got extremely important stakeholders that we are proud to be associated to and work with. For instance, we've got UN agencies that run programs, not necessarily with head office, but with our regional youth forums. And very also important to mention is that we are a member-based council. So we've got youth organizations that are affiliated to us on a voluntary basis. And affiliation means that there are certain requirements that you need to meet in order to become either constituency, regional or national affiliate. Perhaps just to share with our listeners is that in as far as national affiliation is concerned, national affiliation means as a youth organization, I must be active in 7 or more regions to qualify to become a national affiliate of the NYC. You must have a footprint of young people that you are working with in the region. We have 51 youth organizations that to date are affiliated to us. And in their membership, they are extremely unique. And I'll show you how it addresses the issue that you've raised in as far as period poverty is concerned. You've got political youth organizations that are affiliated to us. You've got faith-based organizations. So these are your wings of churches. The Roman Catholic Youth Desk, Council of Churches, El Siren Youth Desk that are all affiliated to us. But then you also have civic youth organizations that are really thematic thematic, that are, for instance, your NANSOs that are focused on education. Then you've got Scouts Namibia. These people are focused on talent identification, mentorship, and so forth. And then you've got organizations that purely focus on gendered and women issues. And what we do with our affiliates is we also budget for them in the work that we do. Of course, it's extremely limited because we've got overheads and salaries to pay, but we recognize that our mandate is youth development and creating access opportunity and facilitating opportunity for the structures and for young people in the country. So in particular, with regard to the question that you've asked, we will find requests either from youth organizations or from structures. For instance, like the Kunene Regional Youth Forum last year has requested, in particularly, can we assist them with financial resources to be able to distribute sanitary pads in the regions? Because you'll find that these issues are not predominantly in all the regions, but in certain parts of our country where the issue persists. And as the Youth Council, we are obligated to support and to facilitate access, because that is also linked to dignity, Arlana, and for us that is extremely important. But also for me, what I want to emphasize and underscore is that the process is always owned by the young leaders at the grassroots level, and they must drive that process because they are the ones that experience and go through these struggles. But they also have an opportunity to change it because the National Youth Council is there to address the issues or to make the plights lesser that the young people face in the country. And I just wanted to share that structure with you because at times as we engage and as we read, there's this perception that the Youth Council is only for a certain group of youth, and contrary to that, we're extremely inclusive, extremely representative, and we've got extremely a very wide and very inclusive footprint of the young people that we've got access to and that work with us in the country.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for sharing that structure, Sharonice, because yes, I agree. I don't think a lot of people know how everything works, and especially the affiliation part. Yeah. And then just before we let you go, just two more questions. I think maybe if you can speak to what you would say is the worst challenge confronting women today, and we can do that in two parts. We can speak of it in a general sense, but then also if you can say the one worst challenge for Namibian women particularly, what would you say that is?
Arlana, that question is particularly easy for me.
Okay.
Because I've experienced it myself, but I wouldn't want to speak on my personal experience.
Okay.
And because I'm a representative of the young people of this country. But I do know that my experience is also a shared experience with other young women that have shattered glass ceilings. In as far as you've done, you've explored the less taken road, where you'll not find many young women. And with that, Arlana, it really comes, the struggle that continues to face young women is the gendered insults, the name calling, and the gender biases. Sharonice cannot lead the National Youth Council because it's either she has slipped her way to the top. Right, and those are gender biases that still persist. And we go through these issues because we do not address these gender biases. Or Sharonice is unable to lead the National Youth Council because of the perception that a woman cannot run a state-owned enterprise. It must be a man. Arlana, you will not believe it, that the kind of things that young women leaders go through. If you raise your voice, immediately you're called emotional, just to silence you. And so really, these are things that I experience in my present life, that other young women experience in our present life. But worst of all, Arlana, a shared experience of why men also do not take us seriously is because as women, in particular as young women, we still do not genuinely root for each other. There is a level of backbiting that still persists among us because we do not want to give each other that space to shine and to actually grow, and to know that if Sharonice is there, it's not an individual win for Sharonice, it's a win for young women, and it's a win for the rest of us. So we have an obligation to support her, to see her succeed, because if she wins, she really opens the path to those that come behind her. And for me, really, that is something that is extremely personal and near and dear to me, because as young women, as women in general, we must really become intentional about supporting each other. It can't be lip service. It can't be, to a large extent, very plastic. It must be that if Arlana is not in a room, as Sharonice, I must be able to speak on her behalf, and not be a part of those that want to suppress her or does not want to create that space for her, and not feeling insecure about her capabilities or abilities, and being able to be very confident to share a space with fellow young women. And that for me really is some of the struggles that we need as young women and as women in our country to collectively champion. And we can do so by creating spaces and opportunity for us just to have dialogue and conversation on how do we need to support each other as women. So really for me, one of the challenges that continues to persist is the name calling of women that really go the extra mile in demonstrating leadership, in demonstrating capacity and competencies to make a difference. That it is extremely hard for that woman, be it in an economic space, be it in a political space, be it in a civic space, to be able to take in seriously and to be able to get to the top, because the way she's treated is not the same the man is treated, of what a man leader would go through. And for me, really, that is some of the challenges that we still see persist today.
Now, Namibia has so many. The last question. Namibia has so many inspirational women. Who is that one woman who you regard as a role model in Namibia?
Oh, wow. That is a very difficult question, primarily because I've been exposed from a very tender age in my formative life, when I was in high school, to very strong women in the country. And I truly feel that I never understood it when people said it takes a village to raise a child. But I when I look at my own life, it really does take a village, because I've gone through incredible hands that have all helped to nurture, to shape and to refine and polish. So it will be very hard for me to single out one woman, but there are a few notable names that I'd like to share, that are formidable women that are doing extremely well and that can serve as an inspiration to fellow young women. I operate in a space of civic participation and political youth leadership, so I'm inclined to look at that space because it's a space where I grew up as a youth leader. And at the top of my head, a woman that I endear and that I really admire is our Prime Minister. I feel she's extremely graceful, Honorable Sara Kukongelo Amadila. I feel she's extremely poised and she's extremely structured in how she speaks, but she's also very knowledgeable. I feel like you can wake up the Prime Minister at any hour of the day and she will refer you to a policy, she will refer you to a law, she will refer you to a document that really shows that women are competent, that women are able, and that women are capable. Another woman that inspired me growing up, because I felt that wow, it really shows that I can do it, was Honorable Margaret Mensah Williams. When I grew up in Khomasdal, so immediately growing up, becoming politically conscious, everyone spoke of, oh, you remind me of Margaret Mensah, and I started reading up on her. I started looking up on the work that she's doing, and I saw that Margaret Mensah has an exceptional story to tell, because also as a woman of color, she's done extremely well in political spaces, right? And you'd not find a lot of, if I can refer to ourselves as colored women or bastard women in political spaces. So I was really also in awe of the work that Honorable Mensah did. And then you've got very strong women in private sector as well, that also really inspire, and that have that extraordinary kind of like extraordinary mentality attached to the work that they've done. And when I look at such women, I think of our former head of PricewaterhouseCoopers. Her story also is very unique, where she was our first female black chartered accountant, Menangula. And for me, those are women that stories are extremely powerful to us young women. And Honorable Yvonne Dowsap is someone that I also appreciate and hold in high regard, because Honorable Yvonne Dowsap is extremely well-spoken. She's extremely strong, and she's also an exceptional leader in the legal space, and she also continues to break glass ceilings and barriers that exist. So when I look at these kind of women that I've got to my disposal, right, and then primarily my mother. I mean, I was raised by a single parent, and we're two. I'm the eldest sibling of a brother. But when I look at my mom's story, single women in society also face stereotypes. They also go through the absolute most. But today my mom was able to raise two very decent young professionals. And today my mom has a little bit of respect in her family, because there's something that she has done right in raising two young kids that can take care of themselves, that are educated, that are contributing to taking Namibia forward. And then needless to say, that she's someone that has influenced my life, and that continues to support me in the work that I do. Despite whether she understands what I do or not is a different conversation, but as a parent, she supports me wholeheartedly. So I'm able to do what I do because I've got the love and support of my mother. So definitely she's someone that I not only love, but that inspires me when it gets tough to continue doing the work that I do.
Absolutely. And I'm sure that the list could go on and on and on. I definitely know that for myself, I feel the same, especially in our country. We do have a lot of inspirational women to look up to as young people. Well, Sharonice, thank you so much for coming in today and just talking to us a little bit about what the NYC is doing, and then just giving us some insight to you as well, and your passion. It really shows every time I talk to you.
Thank you, Alana. Thank you for having me.
Always a pleasure. That was Sharonice Busch of the National Youth Council. She is the executive chairperson of the NYC. And